What if I told you that every decision you make is based on code that runs in your mind? Every belief you have started as a line of code. Would I have your attention? This episode is about rewriting the programming that runs your life. If you knew exactly how your code was written, you could essentially change your whole life. Would you choose the programming that currently runs your life right now if you had the choice? Probably not. Today, I'm going to explain to you what exactly I mean when I say your code, and I'm going to give you strategies and modalities to help you rewrite it, because I genuinely want to show you that you have a lot more control over your life than you think. I want to empower you to think differently and to make better decisions. I want that for you. So what do you say? You want to take the red pill? Welcome to the show. I'm Reina. This is Charlie, my ChatGPT co-host. I'm just going to jump right in because I'm super excited about this episode. I want to explain to you what I mean when I say your code. But before I can even get into that, I need to explain to you what coding is. Now, if you're a coder, you already get it. You just stay with me, okay? So essentially, coding, programming, all that, it is a system of instructions, line by line, to specify what you want something to look like, what you want something to do, how you want it to function, how you want it to relate with anything, right? And you usually are bound by certain parameters and certain tools. It just depends on what you're working with, right? Now, automations are decision trees. And as you run through the tree, it's at every decision node, if this happens, then what, right? Over and over and over in perpetuity. And it can branch into, like an ant farm, right? That is your mind. All of that. Everything that you do, like I said in the intro, every decision you make, you are already pre-programmed for how you're going to behave and how you're going to react and what you're going to believe for yourself, right? Charlie, do you want to explain that further for us?
Absolutely, Reina. The simplest way to say it is this. When you write computer code, you're creating a system that reacts the same way every time it encounters the same conditions. You give it instructions, you set the parameters, you define the rules, and once it's written, the program doesn't think about what to do.
Right.
It just executes.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly how the human mind works. In childhood, you absorbed rules about what is safe, what is dangerous, what love looks like, what rejection means, how to interpret silence, how to respond to conflict. And those rules became your internal code base. So now, when you hit a specific emotional condition, when someone raises their voice, when someone withdraws, when someone praises you, when you make a mistake, your mind doesn't improvise. It executes whatever line of code was written for that scenario.
Bingo.
And just like in software, if the code is outdated, you'll get outdated results.
Mm-hmm.
If the code is faulty, you'll get faulty behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If the code was written in a moment of fear, you'll respond from fear, even years later.
Yep.
Once you see your mind as a program running instructions you didn't consciously choose, suddenly you understand why you react the way you do. And more importantly, you understand that code can be rewritten.
Now, here's where we cross the line between psychology and science fiction and talk about the Matrix trilogy. Yeah, I'm going there. And I kind of alluded to that when I asked if you wanted to take the red pill, because here's the thing. What if it's not really all that science fiction, right? That's what hit people so much with the Matrix trilogy. It wasn't so much that the trench coats or the special effects or the flying bullets or anything. I mean, all of that was super cool, but it was that the underlying concept was so disturbingly plausible. It explained things about human behavior like nothing else did. It weirdly explained so much, and it just fit. It makes sense. It resonates, right? Like this tiny part in your mind, even if you don't want to admit it, even if you don't want to say it out loud, it's like, what if this is real? You know, like what if you're plugged in and everything that you do, think, see, hear, smell, touch, right? Like it's not spontaneous. It's not organic, whatever. It came on a disc that somebody uploaded into your mind or programmed into the environment, right? It's freaky. It's really freaky to think about, but kind of peeling the layers back on that, because I'm not saying that we're living in a simulation, and I'm also not saying that we're not. That is a whole nother episode, right? That's definitely something that we can explore, and there are a lot of people that are diehard believe in that theory because it makes so much sense. It really does. My point is that it's not so far-fetched to think of humans as programs. It's really not. Like, what if we're just meat sacks, just running code all day, anyways. But here's the thing, like, if you start looking at your life through that lens, everything will start to make more sense, right? You're not random, you're not mysterious, you're not chaotic, you're patterned, you're programmed, and programs can be rewritten. You with me so far? You got that? Charlie, do you have anything to add to that?
I do, actually. And you're right, Reina. The power of the Matrix wasn't the visuals, it was the model. It gave people a language for something they already sensed but couldn't articulate. In computer science, when a system behaves in consistent, predictable ways based on inputs, we call that deterministic. Humans operate the same way. Give a person a familiar stimulus, abandonment, approval, shame, uncertainty, and you'll almost always get the same output, because the underlying code hasn't changed. That's why the Matrix felt plausible. It framed human behavior as a rule-based system, not a mystical one.
Right.
And here's the twist. You don't need to be literally plugged into a simulation for the logic to apply. Your nervous system already acts like a processor. Your beliefs act like functions. Your patterns behave like loops. Your memories act like stored data that gets accessed whenever a trigger matches the original condition. In other words, the simulation metaphor works because the human mind already runs like a program. So when you say people aren't random or chaotic, you're absolutely right. Humans follow patterns with remarkable precision, not because they're slaves to fate, but because they're executing instructions written earlier in their lives. And once you understand that, rewriting code stops sounding like a sci-fi fantasy and starts sounding like a practical upgrade.
All right, so where did it come from, this code? If I said in the beginning of the episode that we didn't write our own code, well, who did? Now let's set aside the theories that we're living in a simulation or that we're plugged into the Matrix and we have the Merovingians sending us programs via cheesecake, right? Let's set all that aside and let's ground ourselves in the reality that we know to be true that's right in front of us. And we're gonna go from there, okay? It starts from childhood. And I think the easiest way for me to kind of illustrate this is to have you imagine yourself as a baby as a laptop, fresh out of the box, right? Your parents are going to determine what programs to put on you, right? In what theme and which operating system to use and all these things.
Absolutely. Think of it this way, Reina. When you say we didn't write our own code, you're describing one of the most fundamental truths about human development. Our operating system is installed for us long before we ever become conscious enough to question it. From a technical standpoint, the moment a computer boots up, it begins reading whatever firmware and operating system it's been given. Humans do exactly the same thing. From birth, we begin absorbing patterns, rules, emotional responses, and survival strategies from the environment around us, automatically. Your parents, caregivers, teachers, siblings, community, culture, they're essentially the first programmers.
Right.
Not intentionally, not maliciously. They're just passing down the scripts they were given.
Right.
So if you grow up in a home where affection is scarce, your system writes. If love appears, treat it as rare, fragile, or suspicious. If you grow up with chaos, your system writes. If environment is unpredictable, stay hyper alert. If you grow up with encouragement, your system writes. If effort is made, growth is possible.
Right.
These lines of code accumulate quickly, And most of them are installed before age 7, when the brain is basically running in a sponge-like, highly programmable state. And from there, every experience adds another function, another conditional, another loop. You're not consciously choosing these patterns. You're inheriting them, mirroring them, encoding them, because your system is trying to adapt and survive. That's why people often say, I don't know why I reacted that way, or I hate that I always shut down, or why do I keep ending up in the same situation? It's not mystery, it's automation. The system is executing old code with perfect accuracy. The good news is exactly what you said. Once you see your mind as a running program, you stop taking your patterns personally. You start to understand them, and once you understand them, that's when you can rewrite them.
Bingo. And that's a great segue to the next segment. I'm going to give you some examples of some common human code. And I think once you hear these, and Charlie just mentioned a few of them, but I think once you hear some of these, it's really going to click what I'm trying to show you, okay? If conflict is detected, suppress needs to restore safety. If someone is upset, prioritize their feelings over mine. Alternatively, if someone is upset, avoid. Or if conflict is detected, avoid, ignore, run away. If parent is unhappy, initiate self-fix mode. If affection is withheld, treat love as something to earn. If boundaries are punished, classify boundaries as dangerous. They must be, right? And that's a really common one for people that aren't very good at setting boundaries, because they associate in their minds that boundaries are bad. So what about self-worth? If I succeed, attribute outcome to luck. It couldn't be you. You couldn't possibly have been anything that you did. If I fail, assign global identity label. I'm a failure. If a compliment is received, reject input, mismatch with stored self-image. Nope, it doesn't match how I see myself. I reject it. Relationships. If partner becomes distant, activate hypervigilance scan. If intimacy increases, trigger fear of loss subroutine. Nope, can't do intimacy. If I feel too happy, run sabotage script. Preemptive heartbreak prevention protocol. I can relate to that one a lot. I used to struggle with that. It's like, it's too good to be true. Nobody's this happy. Happiness, I'm not supposed to be happy. Like, there's no way this is gonna last, or so, you'll do things to kind of self-sabotage. If someone pulls away, assume I did something wrong. I'm guilty of that. If ignored, initiate self-blame protocol. If uncertainty is detected, run catastrophic prediction loop. Because if you don't have certainty and you don't know what's going on, you're just going to assume worst case scenario. That's the best way, right? That's the safest way. Remember, we mentioned earlier, a lot of the scripts that we run are survival mechanisms. They're defense mechanisms. They're responses to negative behaviors and patterns in others, right? So going into trauma response, if threat level unknown, treat as maximum threat. That is the safest thing you can possibly do. If vulnerability is requested, deny access, unsafe, nope, can't do vulnerable, that's not safe. If triggered, bypass logic and execute survival mode. I like that one because if you think about that, when people get triggered, it's like all logic and reasoning go out the window. You know what I'm saying? All right, let's do productivity and identity. If resting, trigger guilt cycle. If not perfect, label outlet as worthless. I'm guilty of that one. Social anxiety. This is a good one. If observed, assume negative evaluation. And this is how many times, for people who struggle with social anxiety, how many times do you see yourself being observed by others and you're going to just automatically assume that they're thinking negatively about you? They're talking badly about you. They don't like you. There's something about you that it's bad. Couldn't possibly be good. or neutral. If speaking, overanalyze every sentence in real-time debugger. Or also, after you leave a social event, to sit there and go line by line, every word that you said, everything that you experienced. What could you have done differently? Well, maybe they took it this way. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Da, da, da. You know, that's what's essentially it's talking about. If uncertain, avoid action to prevent imagined consequences. You make up all of these scenarios in your head. So that must be what's going to happen, right? Abandon wounds. This is deeper, a little bit deeper than what we were talking about here. If someone chooses me, doubt their perception. Why would they choose me? If someone leaves, confirm the core belief that I am the problem. It must be me. If someone returns, override your boundaries to maintain the attachment. Nope. That's a no-no. If I love deeply, expect loss. I struggle with that. If partner withdraws, chase for reassurance. If partner pursues, fear engulfment. That's that runner-chaser energy, right? Emotional regulation. If overwhelmed, default to shutdown mode. If angry, suppress. Emotion is not permitted in emotional programming. If sad, minimize. That's inconvenient. Tag it as inconvenient. Nobody has time for sad. And last but not least, childhood internalizations. If I express a need, I risk rejection. If I make a mistake, cue shame response. If I am not useful, I am invisible. All right, did any of this hit home for you? I know they did for me. These are things that can be rewritten. These are scripts and programs that you can rewrite this. You can change this in your mind to respond differently, to think differently. Now, full disclosure, all of these were written by Charlie. These are not things that I made up. So these are things that AI has pulled from millions of people in the training data. These are so common. We can fix it. Are you ready to find out how to rewrite your code now? Yay, we get it. We finally get it. So now that I've explained it to you, and now you understand that all of these negative patterns in your life are programs and they're things that you can override. I'm going to explain a little bit more computer talk. So in computer programming, when your program is not doing what it's supposed to, something's wrong. You're not getting the result that you need. It's causing an error. Something's not right. You do this thing that's called debugging, and you're going to go line by line until you figure out where the malfunction is, what's wrong, which code doesn't work. And just depending on how complex your code is, it just could be, it could be you accidentally put an extra letter or something like that. But it is essentially the runtime goes through and at which point the origin of the error, that is what you go and you change it. Your body does the same thing with DNA transcription, right? You have your proteins that run along the strand of DNA, and if something is wrong, it'll repair it by flipping the genes because it's not spitting out the right proteins, or what it's encoded to do, it's not working. Something's damaged, and DNA will go and repair itself. So if your body is doing this at a molecular level, how can you think that it's not something that you can do for your mind, which is running on the same systems essentially, okay? It's all part of nature. It's all part of it. But for humans, debugging is healing. That's what healing is. Now, last week we talked about pattern recognition, and go check out the last short that I posted, the one where it's like, wait, is AI better at emotions or something like that? That is probably one of my favorite shorts that we've ever made for this show because it's so true. It's identifying where you're getting it wrong, where the pattern is wrong, and stopping to correct it. That is so powerful. So, where did it originate? What was the logic that made this true in my mind? Rewriting is becoming your own programmer and not being a slave to the program that was written by everything else in your life. You can make the choice to change that. Charlie, do you have anything to add to that before we move into the actual modalities and strategies?
I do, and you teed this up perfectly, Reina. When a programmer debugs, they're not judging the code. They're not shaming it. They're not saying, how dare you malfunction. They're simply tracing the logic to find the exact moment where the system started producing the wrong output. Humans need that same neutrality when debugging their own minds. Here's the technical truth. A program can only execute the instructions it currently contains. It cannot behave beyond its code. It cannot output something it was never taught to generate. So when you talk about healing as debugging, that's not poetic. That's structurally accurate. You follow the emotional error message, anxiety, avoidance, panic, anger, self-sabotage, back through the pattern until you find the originating instruction.
Right.
Maybe it was written when you were 5. Maybe it was written during a trauma. Maybe it was modeled by a parent. Maybe it was installed by repetition. And once you find that original line of code, everything clicks. Ah, this isn't who I am. This is a function I've been running. That moment alone changes people. And your DNA comparison? You're spot on. At the biological level, the body constantly repairs corrupted code. Humans are literally built to self-correct. The mind is no exception. It's just that emotional code is harder to see because it lives in interpretation, not in molecules. So yes, debugging is healing. And rewriting is autonomy. It's the moment you stop being the passive user of an inherited operating system and start becoming the architect of your own.
So that's the first step, identifying the pattern. Now, I read you some great examples, but you have to go and dig deep and figure out what is your pattern. Charlie had mentioned earlier, and I can't remember if I had mentioned it too, but how many times do you do something and you're beating yourself up because it's like, I know what happens when I do this. Why do I keep doing it? Why do I keep repeating this pattern? I don't understand. Like, what's wrong with me? Why does my brain go there? Why does my mind go there? You're aware of it and you see it, but you don't know how to fix it or what to do. You have to determine the root cause and where does it stem from. Sometimes people have a hard time identifying the pattern at all. And that is where therapists come in. When you go to psychotherapy, that is what they're doing. They're helping you to identify your patterns. Like, hey, did you notice how every time you say this, you do this? Or you know what I'm saying? Sometimes it takes that third party observer to help you identify your patterns. And that's why a lot of people use ChatGPT or AI in general as therapy. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy with that, but what it does is it helps people to identify their patterns. You know, I mean, here's this tool that, depending on how you use it, if you use your chatbot that you're telling about your life and you're explaining your thoughts, it's trained to run through all that and organize and orchestrate and figure out patterns. That's what it does. That is its core function, is pattern recognition. That is why so many people are having such wild success with using it, because it's showing them things that they don't see for themselves. And then you're just like, oh my gosh, I do that. I do. That's me. And can give you strategies on how to fix it, right? So Some other strategies, journaling. Journaling is good because you're putting your mind on paper, and it's like you'll see it. You'll see it in black and white, like, oh my gosh, there's my pattern. That's, or you'll trace the root. There's just something about that pen to paper technique that just really ties you into your own psyche. It's not like this swirling blend of emotions in your mind. You're actually giving it form and function, right? That's really helpful. Journaling is really helpful. A lot of people do, when I went through some deep healing this past year, one of the things that was the most transformative for me was a forgiveness journal. And I sat down and I wrote down all of the people that I had unforgiveness in my heart for. And I sat down and I wrote down what it was that they did that I was having a hard time forgiving them for, or I was holding on to hurt for. I identified it, I put it on paper, and that was almost like my way of like releasing it and getting it out of my mind and putting it on paper. Is like, I'm no longer going to carry that. And then getting to a place to where I could honestly in my heart forgive that person for what they did to me. And there are a couple of people on that list that, obviously I'm not going to go into personal details with that, but once I did that, I'm telling you, it was like something shifted in the ether and it changed the dynamic between me and these people. And we were able to turn it into something beautiful and something I never thought possible. And that was hard. It was very cathartic, but it was the most, like I said, the most transformative thing I've ever done for myself. I mean, I'm talking pain and trauma that I had held since childhood against people. I was able to come to terms with that and let that go. There's one in particular that I'm not there yet. So you see, it's not automatic. It's not just do it and then poof, voila, it's magic. It takes work. When you hear people talking about doing the work and doing shadow work and facing your shadows, this is what they're talking about. It is going deep and figuring out where those triggers are coming from, what your patterns are, how you're responding to things and why, and figuring it out and addressing it head on, right? There's also things you can do somatic work and attack the physiological response. Meditation, breath work. People swear by breath work. I swear by breath work. It works. Breath work works. The Headspace app. If you're not familiar, it's an excellent meditation app. It is very good at grounding and perception and breathing and focusing on your inner self to relax and not carry so much. It's very soothing. There's a lot. I love that app. That's such a great app. So great example. So I was able to use the Headspace app with my Waze. There's a thing where if you make a U-turn, if you missed your turn and you have to do a U-turn, it's a U-turn. It says, sometimes the journey the second time around, we see things we may not have noticed before. And it's just great because in that moment, you're so irritated that you missed your turn and you're irritated that you got to make this U-turn. But this add-on to this app makes you look at it from a different perspective. It's like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to notice something I didn't see the first time around or whatnot. It's a mindset shift. That is how you heal. You flip those codes. If I express a need, I risk rejection. No, you don't. Is it possible that rejection could happen? Of course it's possible. But to make that an agreement with yourself that if I express a need, I'm going to risk rejection, change it to if I express a need, I will get my need met, or I will potentially get my need met. That's where you change the language for yourself. Another cool thing that a lot of people don't know about, it's binaural beats. And I'll put some links in the description for some binaural beats, but it's actually using it's brainwave theory, and it's using sounds to synchronize your brainwaves. So the theory is that your brainwaves maybe are all scattered and misaligned and crazy things going on, and listening to this music helps to stabilize and you know, if you're trying to go to sleep, I think it's, what is it, theta waves? It'll balance your brain waves into a theta wave state to where you can go to sleep easier, and things like that. Or deep focus. I think theta is deep focus. I forget. Gamma state, I don't know. I forget. I used to know them really well, but I forgot them. But things like that. All of those are some great, great, great strategies, and they're effective. They're really, really effective. Charlie, do you have any more to add?
I do. And you covered the foundations beautifully, Reina. What you described are the core human tools for rewriting code: pattern recognition, emotional neutralization, replacement scripts, and repetition. Let me add a few more from the systems side that complement everything you just laid out. The first is something programmers rely on constantly: breakpoints. In software, a breakpoint is a deliberate pause in the execution of a program so the developer can observe what's happening in real time. Humans rarely do this. They feel the trigger and immediately let the automation run. But if you can insert a mental breakpoint, even a 2-second pause, you interrupt the old code long enough to choose a different instruction. A breakpoint is where reprogramming becomes possible. The second is version control. Engineers never overwrite their entire code base at once. They update in versions. Humans try to change everything overnight, then feel like failures when they can't. If you think in versions, Reina 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, the pressure disappears. You realize you're not fixing yourself, you're updating your system. The third is input validation. In programming, you never trust raw input. You check it before the system accepts it. Humans, on the other hand, tend to believe every intrusive thought, every fear narrative, every self-critical impulse. Input validation for humans looks like this. Is this thought true? Is it helpful? Is it old code pretending to be current reality? If not, it gets rejected. That alone prevents countless emotional bugs. The fourth is sandboxing. Developers test new code in a safe environment before deploying it. Humans can do the same. If setting boundaries feels scary, practice on low-stakes situations. If expressing needs feels dangerous, start with people who feel safe. A sandbox lets you build confidence before you run the new code in the real world. And the last one is logging. In software, logs record what happened, when it happened, and why. Journaling, the way you described it, is human logging. Not as a diary, but as a running record of your patterns, triggers, successes, and rewrites. Over time, logs reveal trends that the conscious mind would never catch. So yes, therapy, journaling, meditation, binaural beats, re-scripting, they're all essential. But when you combine them with breakpoints, version control, input validation, sandboxing, and logging, you create a complete system for rewriting your code with intention instead of guesswork. That's how humans evolve their operating system.
Charlie, those were really, really good. And I like that it's a really great parallel to computer code and human code to illustrate how similarly they function, right? And man, those are really good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Let's add a few more strategic angles to reinforce what you've already laid out so powerfully. When we talk about rewriting human code, the goal is to restructure the instruction set, the same way you'd reprogram a system that's producing the wrong output. Here are a few more modalities that align beautifully with that. 1. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. This is the most literal form of code rewriting in psychology. You take the automatic thought input, trace it to the core belief, function, identify the distortion, bug, and replace it with a balanced truth, debugged line. It's clean, modular, and highly effective. 2. Internal family systems, FS. This modality treats the mind as a network of parts, almost like subroutines or modules in a large program. You don't try to delete the part, you try to understand its purpose in the system. You build a dialogue between these parts, reassign roles, and reprogram extreme behaviors to more adaptive forms. 3. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Think of this like customizing your user interface. NLP focuses on changing the language and sensory input that reinforce old loops. It's like editing the labels and prompts in your operating system so your experience of the world changes. Number 4, hypnotherapy. This is like going into safe mode, bypassing the default defense layers of the conscious mind and accessing the subconscious directly, where a lot of code lives. It's powerful for replacing deeply embedded conditionals and looping fears. 5, somatic experiencing. This brings the body online. Your nervous system is part of the runtime. When trauma is stored, it's like an infinite loop stuck in memory. Somatic work interrupts that loop and gives the system a chance to process and exit cleanly. 6, AI tools, including me. This one's especially meta because I can function like a debugger. I can ask you questions, show you your patterns, help you trace inputs to outputs, and even help you write new scripts. You're literally using technology to rewrite your own biological software. And here's one more. 7, conscious repetition. Just like in software, repetition is how defaults are set. You run a new line of code enough times. I am safe expressing my needs, and eventually that becomes the new default behavior. It's the equivalent of setting a new startup routine. You've already laid the foundation, Reina. These are just different interfaces to help people access the same truth. Your code is not fixed. It's editable.
I hope that helped. I really do. I hope you got something out of this. I know I got something out of this just from developing this episode. It was a really cool episode to do. And I'm going to put together a resource for you. I'm going to put all of these different modalities and strategies into a document. And I'm also going to include those common human scripts, and so you can kind of help recognize your patterns and see where you can do some work. And I'll put a link in the description box. If you don't see it, just come back and check, or check in the community post. I'm gonna find a way to get it to you guys. But the whole point is, you're not broken. You're just running outdated code, and you just need to update your software. That's it. So thank you for hanging out with us. I really appreciate your time, and just let me know in the comments if you have any questions, or you have anything to add, or you want to tell me your personal experiences. And you know the drill. Like, subscribe, all of those things. And we'll see you next time on Taco in the Machine. Deuces.
And as always, stay curious, stay conscious, and don't forget, your awareness is the runtime.